Explorers. While the Basques were fishing secretly, other Europeans were exploring the world, often using sturdy Basque ships, hiring Basque navigators, and eating Basque salted cod. Christopher Columbus did all three in 1492 when he sailed west looking for a route to Asia and landed instead in the Caribbean islands. Columbus was an Italian whose voyage was financed by the Spanish king and queen. John Cabot, an Italian too, was also looking for a route to Asia. In 1497, Cabot landed in Newfoundland, which he claimed for Britain. Here, he had stumbled across the Basques' secret. His crew reported that the water was so thick with codfish that they only had to dip baskets in the water to scoop them out. Soon, everyone was coming to North America for the codfish. The Portuguese, the British, and the French all fished in the large cod schools off Canada. They reported seeing Basques. Some even said they heard local tribesmen speaking the strange Basque language. In the 17th century, the rich cod fishing land was divided between the two most powerful nations, Britain and France. The Basques protested, saying that, as the discoverers, they too were entitled to a part of North America. All they wanted was the right to fish there, but they had never planted a flag, never made a claim, never told anyone, and now they had lost their fishing grounds. Timeline: 1492, Christopher Columbus sails to the Caribbean. 1497, John Cabot sails to Newfoundland, reports on the cod. 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano finds and explores what is now New York Harbor and the New England coast. 1535, Jacques Cartier explores and claims the mouth of St. Lawrence River for France. He spots 1,000 Basque fishermen in the area. 1576, Sir Martin Frobisher leaves England on the first of 3 voyages to find the Northwest Passage. Cod becomes American. In the early 1600s, a small religious group that had fled from England to Holland was looking for a permanent home, a place where they could practice their religion and prosper. They considered an area on the northeast coast of South America said to be El Dorado, the legendary lost city of gold. They also considered North America, and one day these pilgrims gathered around a map of the coast of the little-known North American continent. The map had been drawn by John Smith, a famous British adventurer, and it showed a small hook of land with a funny name, Cape Cod. In 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold, a British explorer, had named the peninsula Cape Cod when sailing the New England coast. He reported that his ship had been constantly pestered by cod. In 1614, John Smith, who had helped establish a permanent British colony at Jamestown with Gosnold, charted the coastline of New England. He used Gosnold's name for the peninsula of Cape Cod. The voyage was famous for Smith having earned a fortune by catching 47,000 cod off the coast of America and selling them in southern Spain. In 1620, the Pilgrims set sail on the Mayflower and landed near Cape Cod, hoping to catch cod and sell it for great sums of money too. They decided to settle there and named their colony Plymouth. Timeline: 1602, Bartholomew Gosnold gives Cape Cod its name and reports on the wealth of cod in New England. 1607, Gosnold and John Smith help establish a permanent settlement in Jamestown, Virginia. 1614, Smith charts the New England coast and earns a fortune catching 47,000 cod and selling them in Spain. 1620, the Pilgrims land in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Tongues, which have a rich taste and gelatinous texture, are not really tongues, but the throat part under the chin. Stewed codfish tongues. 1 pound fresh codfish tongues, salt, 1 large onion, pepper, ½ pound clear pork fat. Place pork in fry pan and let cook until brown. Add onions, then tongues, which have been cleaned well, and salt and pepper to taste. Simmer about a ½ hour. From the Highlands in the Sea, compiled by the Ingonish Women's Hospital Auxiliary, Ingonish, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, 1974. Winter in Massachusetts. During their first 2 years in America, many pilgrims starved to death. Winter in Massachusetts was snowy and so cold that some Europeans believed this new land was uninhabitable. The hungry pilgrims could have survived on dried cod as the Vikings had done farther north, except the pilgrims did not know how to fish or hunt, nor did they know much about farming. Often they had to resort to stealing the hidden food reserves of the native people. These natives called themselves Wampanoag. They made lines from vegetable fibers, made hooks from bones, and caught cod and other fish and swam near the coastline. They loved eating the clams they gathered on the shoreline and even showed the Pilgrims how to pry them open. But the Pilgrims were not familiar with clams and would not eat them at first. Only in desperation, nearly starving, would they eat clams and lobster, which grew to great sizes and crawled out of the sea onto the beaches. The Pilgrims were determined to succeed. They sent back to England for equipment and advice. They learned how to fish cod, dry it and salt it, and to plow the fish waste into the soil for fertilizer. From the Wampanoag, they learned about farming local crops such as corn, beans, and squash. Slowly, as they became successful fishermen, they established fishing stations along the New England coast. Finally, they not only had food, but something valuable to trade. In 1640, they sold a record 300,000 dried cod to Europe. Timeline, 1623. The Pilgrims established their first fishing station in Gloucester. It fails. 1625, they try again in Gloucester, but fail again. They send to England for expert advice. 1640, the Massachusetts Bay Colony brings to market a record 300,000 cod. The Cod Revolution. By the 1650s, New England was becoming an important commercial center. Cod from the coast of New England, Labrador, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia was brought to Boston and sold to merchants who shipped it to Europe. A city was being built around Boston's deep, sheltered harbor, and the waterfront was a forest of masts, crossbars, and rigging of ships from around the Atlantic. One of Boston's leading trade partners was the Basque port of Bilbao. The Boston merchants sold cod to the Basques, and the Basques sold them oranges, wine, and products made of iron. More and more people moved to New England, not only to fish for cod, but to be merchants, shipbuilders, farmers, and craftsmen, carpenters, blacksmiths, barrel makers, furniture makers, to provide goods to a prosperous and growing colony. The cod trade transformed New England from a ragged pioneer outpost to a thriving society of growing cities and towns. Cod became the symbol of prosperity. In Massachusetts, carvings of cod decorated houses, churches, and government buildings. The merchant families of Boston, who grew wealthy trading cod, became known as the codfish aristocracy. To dress a cod's head or a fresh cod, take it and put it into a kettle that hath a cover fitted on it, into which put 4 anchovies, 6 whitings, a quart of oysters with liquor, a pint of shrimps, a pennyworth of mace, 2 shallots, and after it hath simmered over the fire about an hour, take out the 2 jawbones, put in half a pound of sweet butter, and serve it up. The like for a whole cod, a turbot, a mullet. John Collins, Salt and Fishery, London, 1682. Not the lips. Fried cod head. Obtain 4 medium-sized cod heads, more for a large family. After they have been sculpted, to sculpt heads, with sharp knife, cut head down through the eyes, grip back of head firmly and pull. Prepare to cook as follows. Cut heads in 2, skin and remove lips, wash well, and dry. Dip both sides of head in flour, sprinkle with salt and pepper to taste. Fry in fat until golden brown on both sides. Serve with potatoes and green peas or any other vegetable preferred. Mrs. Lloyd G. Hahn, Wesleyville, Newfoundland, From Fat Back and Molasses, 1974. The slave trade. As early as 1645, Boston cod traders became involved in the great crime of their time, the slave trade. For years, Europeans had imported slaves from Africa and sent them to the plantations of the Caribbean. Ships from New England sold high-quality salted cod to the Europeans, then they traveled to the Caribbean. There they sold the worst quality salted cod to Caribbean plantations to feed the thousands of Africans forced to work all day in the tropical sun producing sugar. The Boston merchants would buy their molasses, which is made from sugar. Back in New England, the molasses was distilled into rum and sold in America and in Africa, where it was used to buy more slaves for the Caribbean, who would be fed the New England salt cod. Accra. Codfish balls from the French Caribbean. 1 kilo flour, 1 packet powder yeast, and a little baking soda, or it can be all baking soda. Thyme, parsley, hot pepper, chive, local green onion. Soaked and flaked salt cod. Add 1 egg, beat together, let rest 1 day, spoon into hot oil. Camelite Marshall, La Table Creole, St. Felix, Guadalupe. In the American South, slaves modified African cooking for white people. After the Civil War, this process continued as many former slaves found jobs cooking for corporations or the railroad. I was born in Murray County, Tennessee in 1857, a slave. I was given the name of my master, D.J. Estes, who owned my mother's family, consisting of 7 boys and 2 girls. I, being the youngest of the family, so being Rufus Estes' self-published book, given the flaking technique in his recipe, the date and place, the codfish is probably salt cod, stewed codfish. Take a piece of boiled cod, remove the skin and bones, and pick into flakes. Put these in a stew pan with a little butter. Add salt and pepper, minced parsley, and juice of a lemon. Put on the fire, and when the contents of the pan are quite hot, the fish is ready to serve. Good things to eat. Rufus Estes, 1911. Formerly of the Pullman Company Private Car Service and present chef of the subsidiary companies of the United States Steel Corporations in Chicago. The American Revolution. The New England colonies were ruled by the British government. When the British king decided to control the rebellious colonists by taxing them on important trade items such as molasses and tea, the colonists were furious. They had been doing well without British participation. Then, further laws were passed that limited even the right of Americans to trade cod. But by then, the American Revolution had begun. From 1775 to 1781, 13 of the American colonies fought the British. The colonies of the far north, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Newfoundland, remained in the British Empire. It was too cold to fish for cod in their northern winters, and so they did not develop as prosperous an economy as had given the lower 13 a feeling of independence. When in 1782 they began to negotiate peace with the British, the most difficult point to resolve was the right of the newly independent Americans to fish cod. Timeline: 1733. The British, trying to control the New England economy, declare a tax on molasses. It fails to slow trade. 1764. The British government tries again with the Sugar Act. 1765. The British further restrict Americans with the Stamp Act, followed by the Townshend Acts in 1767. 1773. Angry Americans dump tea into Boston Harbor. 1775 to 1781. The American Revolution. 1781. The British surrender at Yorktown. November 19, 1782, after years of arguing about cod fishing rights, a treaty is signed between the British and the new United States of America. Cape Cod kids don't use no sleds. Haul away, heave away, they slide down hills on codfish heads. Sea shanty. In 1750, Captain Francis Golet claimed that Marblehead, Massachusetts was famous for its large, well-fed children who, he said, were the biggest in North America. According to Golet, the chief cause is attributed to their feeding on cod's head, which is their principal diet. But not the eyes. Fisherman codhead chowder. 8 codheads, the eyes removed, 3-ounce salt pork, 2 sliced onions, 6 sliced potatoes, butter, salt, and pepper. Try out, render the pork. Add the onions and fry until golden. Lay in a kettle, then add the codheads and potatoes. Cover with cold water and cook till the potatoes are done. Season. Add a good chunk of butter. Fishermen think removing the bones is sissy. Victuals for the Captain, Cape Cod Seafood Recipes, compiled by Harriet Adams, comments by N. M. Halper, Provincetown, 1941. A new kind of revolution. The 19th century was a time of great change for Europe and North America. The skies of Britain, France, Germany, and the United States were blackening with the soot from factory chimneys. Engine power was replacing manpower. The British learned to produce steel inexpensively, and soon steel was replacing wood. New ships were made out of steel and driven by powerful engines. At first, very little changed for fishermen. They still went to sea in wooden ships powered only by sails and lowered 2-man rowboats in which to fish. The only modernization in the past few centuries had been that fishermen learned to bait a line a mile long with 1,000 hooks instead of a short line with 1 or 2. Because the 19th century was an age of newfound sciences, scientists began asking, are fishermen taking too many fish? If they had enough hooks, wouldn't they take all the fish in the ocean? Timeline: 1815. The French government equips its North American cod fishing fleet with long lines with more than 1,000 hooks. Scientists begin worrying about overfishing. 1834, slavery is abolished in the British Caribbean. 1848, slavery is abolished in the French Caribbean. 1862, a British commission led by Thomas Huxley concludes that overfishing with long lines is impossible. 1863, slavery is abolished in the Dutch Caribbean. With the decline of sugar plantations, the New England Caribbean cod trade almost disappears. British scientists studied the ocean and the fish, both the herring that were used for bait and the cod they caught with it, and by the 1880s said that no matter how many fish fishermen took, there were so many fish in the ocean producing so many millions of eggs that the fishermen could go on taking as much as their boats would carry. Steel ships. In the 1880s, the British invented a large steel engine-powered fishing boat that dragged a large net to catch fish. The British were catching and eating large amounts of cod. It was the base for the most popular British meal, fish and chips, batter fried cod with French fries. Soon, all the nations of northern Europe fished with this type of boat. They all ate cod. The Danish ate it fresh with mustard for New Year's Eve. Sicilians ate salt cod for Christmas dinner. The Basques ate it salted with wonderful sauces. Caribbeans mashed their salt cod and ate it with hot peppers. The Portuguese fried it with potatoes. The Europeans caught many more fish with their new steel ships. But after 10 years, there were fewer cod in northern Europe, and the new ships were not catching as many. So they built even bigger ships with bigger nets and took more fish. Timeline: 1881, the British build the first steam-powered cod fishing trawler, which drags a net over the side. 1892, the first otter trawl, the huge modern fishing net that drags chains on the bottom and has an enormous opening floating on the top, is built in Scotland. 1893, as an experiment, the U.S. government outfits a Cape Cod steam-powered fishing boat with an otter trawl. Fish balls. A man went walking up and down to find a place where he could dine in town. He found himself an expensive place and entered in with modest face. He took his purse, his pocket hence, but all he had was 15 cents. He looked the menu through and through to see what 15 cents would do. The cheapest item of them all was 30 cents for 2 fish balls. The waiter, he on him did call. He softly whispered, 1 fish ball. The waiter bellowed down the hall, this creep here wants just 1 fish ball. The guests they turned both one and all to see who wanted 1 fish ball. The man then said, quite ill at ease, and a piece of bread, sir, if you please. The waiter bellowed down the hall, you get no bread with 1 fish ball. There is a moral to this all. You get no bread with 1 fish ball. Who would have bread with 1 fish ball? Must get it first or not at all. Who would fish balls with fixins eat? Must get some friend to stand the treat. Anonymous American. 20th century. In the early 20th century, a young New Yorker named Clarence Birdseye went fur trapping in Labrador, Canada. He learned to freeze vegetables in the Arctic wind and could thaw them to feed his family during the long, cold winter. In 1924, he moved to the fishing port of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and established a frozen fish factory. Now there was more than just salted cod and fresh cod. There was frozen cod. Machines cut fillets and put them in boxes. Other machines cut fish into sticks. Frozen fish became a popular food for school lunches and in homes all over the United States, especially in places ocean fish had not been available before, such as the Midwest. Fishermen learned to freeze fish on their ships. Now they did not have to return to port to sell fresh fish. They could haul up thousands of tons of fish in giant nets, week after week, and keep them frozen. After World War II, submarine hunting techniques such as spotter airplanes and sonar were used to find the fish in the ocean. The nets scraped along the bottom of the sea for miles. There was no longer any place for a cod to hide. Timeline: 1921. A fish filleting machine is developed in New England. 1924. New Yorker Clarence Birdseye developed the frozen food process and establishes a frozen fish plant. 1939 to 1945. World War II brings development of factory ships that can freeze fish on boats. 1950s. Fish sticks become very popular. Last cod. Most of the fishing nations of the world started to believe that they no longer had enough fish in their waters to share with the fishermen of other nations. The Icelanders and the British even fought wars over who could fish for cod in Icelandic water. In 1975, after the third of these cod wars, Iceland declared that only their own fishermen could fish in the ocean within 200 miles of their shore. Soon, most other nations followed and declared the same kind of zones. But the fishermen caught less fish because there were fewer and fewer and fewer fish left to catch. Not only cod were disappearing. Now, an estimated 60% of the species of fish that are popularly eaten are showing signs of disappearing. Tuna, swordfish, and salmon are becoming scarcer in the Atlantic, and with fewer fish in the Atlantic, fishermen are moving their big nets to the Pacific. There are still a few cod left in the North Atlantic Ocean, but governments and fishermen have to learn how to limit what they catch, or soon there will be no big fish left in the ocean at all. And then what will happen to the humpback whale, and the seals that eat cod bellies, and the birds that eat fish, and to the smaller fish that the cod eat, and to the smaller fish they eat, and to the zooplankton and the phytoplankton? And what will happen to man if there are no more fish? 1958, 1971, 1975. Iceland has 3 wars with the British because the Icelanders want to ban foreigners from fishing for cod in Icelandic waters. 1963, the Canadian-built schooner Teresa E. Connor, the last sail-powered cod fishing vessel, returns to Nova Scotia unable to find a crew to work for her. 1975, Icelanders declare a 200-mile zone around them in which foreigners are not allowed to fish without permission. Soon, most maritime nations declare their own exclusive zones. 1992, the Canadian government, acknowledging that their cod population is near extinction, indefinitely bans cod fishing on the Grand Banks of Atlantic Canada, putting 30,000 fishermen out of work.